Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Committee of the Whole. Before I do that, I'd like to read something. Pursuant to the gubernatorial disaster proclamation of the declaration of emergency for the city of Urbana, Illinois, related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the changes to the Open Meetings Public Act PA 101, 640, it has been determined that an in-person public meeting is not prudent or safe at this time. Members of the public body will attend remotely using Zoom webinar. Members of the public may attend via Zoom or viewing meetings remotely on Urbana Public Television through Comcast Xfinity on channel 6 and 1096, i3 broadband on channel 6, AT&T Uverse on channel 99, and also streamed on the web, which is livestream.com/Urbana. With that, can the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Here.
Mr. Evans, Ms. Hersey,
Here.
Ms. Colasetti,
Here.
Ms. Bishop,
Here.
Ms. Wilkin,
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here.
All right, the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes of the previous meetings from August 16th, 2021. Can I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes from August 16th, 2021.
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya and seconded by Sharice. Are there any corrections? I can't see everybody on the screen here, so. All right, with that, will the clerk please call the roll for the vote of the minutes?
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Wu.
Yes. All right, that motion passes. Are there any additions to the agenda? All right, the first item is closed session per 5 ILCS 120/2C2 for collective bargaining negotiations. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
I move to go into closed session. Second.
Moved by Sharice and seconded by Chandra. Any discussion? All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Mayor Marlin.
Yes.
All right, so what you all should do now is you should close your Zoom window, go to your email, and you'll have a new Zoom link to be entered into the closed session for the public. Once the closed session is done, we will return back to this room. All right. All right, but we do have quorum. Can I have a motion to come out of closed session?
I'll motion to come out of closed session.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, moved by Christopher and seconded by Jaya. I guess we don't have discussion on this. All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
All right, we're back in open session right now. Now is time for public input. If you choose to provide public input, please raise your hand. I think it's *9 if you're on your phone, or if it's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. All right, the first person up is C. Can you please state your name for the record?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, this is Christopher Hansen. Okay, can I go now?
Yes, you may.
All right. I really just wanted to comment on the closed session. You guys were gone for 80 minutes. So I understand you were probably discussing the police contract. I'm wondering if each of you would be good enough when you have a chance to comment later, if you could tell the public why you went into closed session. I mean, I understand the stated reason, and I'm not saying you weren't allowed to go into closed session to discuss that issue. I'm just wondering why you actually did it. I can't think of a reason. I mean, we talk about transparency. It's in the 10 shared principles twice. I don't think you were discussing any particular police officer by name. I think you were probably discussing the contract in general. And I'm trying to understand why the public couldn't have been allowed to listen to that after talking about it for 80 minutes. Veiled from the public, what are we supposed to learn from that? And what are you going to give us in terms of a discussion when you actually come to the discussion item? All of you voted yes to go into that closed session. And I just can't understand for the life of me why you would bother do that when you could have included the public in what I think a lot of people think is one of the most important discussions of your political term. So I hope you don't have to answer me if you don't want, but at least tell your constituents why you thought they shouldn't be allowed to listen into any of that and what needed to be kept secret from the public. Thanks.
All right, thank you for your input. Does anybody else wish to address the committee of the whole at this time?
Mary Alice, I had a one that was emailed to me. Is this an appropriate time to
Yes,
read
go
that?
ahead. That's
All right. So this is from Patrick. I'm going to apologize in advance if I say his name wrong. Commutis. As a resident of Urbana's fourth ward, I am unequivocally opposed to the proposed FOP contract with the city. The Urbana Police Department is a racist and classist institution with a long and despicable history of violence against our community's Black, Brown, and poor residents. The nearly $500,000 increase this represents over the next 3 years should be spent on programs and institutions that support and nurture ones that harass.
yeah, you're freezing again. Can you read the last sentence?
Sure, I apologize for that. One moment, let me get back to it. The nearly $500,000 increase this represents over the next 3 years should be spent on programs and institutions that support and nurture our community members, not one that brutalizes, harasses, and beats them down.
All right. Okay, with that, I don't see any other hands raised.
Read out, and there's Chandra has a hand up too.
Chandra,
I have an email to read as well.
Okay.
It says, hello, Council Member Bishop. I am an Urbana resident living in Ward 5. I am writing to ask that the Urbana City Council not enter into a new contract with the Urbana Police Department. As a resident of Urbana, I am disappointed in the move to enter into a contract that will put more funding towards policing. The UPD has a history of racist violence against Black residents in Urbana, as well as a demonstrated tendency to avoid accountability for officers who commit wrongdoing. This difficult year has shown the world that police don't make communities safer. In a time when many are struggling to access basic necessities, the government shouldn't prioritize police. For these reasons, I do not support the contract with UPD. Thank you, Bess Sana Sabula. I'm sorry if I messed that name up.
Grace, did you have another one? One thing that I think that we probably should do with these, although they haven't gone over, is there is that 4-minute limit. So Jason, would you mind putting up the clock while Grace reads her email? Did you have an email, Grace?
Yes.
That was asked to be put in public? Okay.
Yes, I believe this one hasn't been read yet. I've been trying to listen and compare. Is from Logan Middleton. I'm writing to demand that members of the Urbana City Council not approve the proposed collective bargaining agreement with the Urbana Police Department. The CBA agreement stands to provide raises and a higher pay to Urbana cops. It also proposes less oversight and less accountability for UPD officers. Given that everyday people are still struggling on account of the pandemic, and given the numerous incidents of violence committed by the UPD, why spend more on policing instead of providing for the material well-being of Urbana residents? Do any of you really want these kinds of changes for or in your community? This is a pivotal moment since this new contract lasts 3 years. Voting to approve the CBA demonstrates that you stand with racist police terror, that your commitments are thoroughly anti-Black, and that you are choosing to willfully ignore the testimony that has been shared with you by community members in these meetings since summer 2020 and before. Reject this contract now.
Okay, all right. With that,
We have some hands up from the public.
that's what I was just going to look. Thank you. Alan Max Axelrod, sorry.
Oh, wow. Going first. Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Alan Max Axelrod, City of Urbana resident. I just wanted to say that what we are going to see tonight is a reflection of the campaign promises made. And so I'm going to go over a few notable campaign promises. The following have promised to reimagine policing: Christopher Evans, Chandra Bishop, Diane Marlin. The following have pledged to, in a very particular definition that prioritizes community resources in programs over expanding policing, to defund the police, including Jai Colasetti and Grace Wilkins. I hope that the vote that is taken tonight reflects integrity upon those promises. And what I also want to say is that I did look at some of the disciplinary items in the CBA. If it is the same version that I have seen, the only thing that I was particularly a fan of was the discontinuation of expiring disciplinary records. That is to say that people will not be taken unawares by police that have a problematic disciplinary record simply because they have timed out some of their past conduct. That remains relevant. So I hope that that is something that stays in the contract as negotiations continue. And I hope that the campaign promises made were made in good faith. Have a good night.
Thank you for your input. All right, I'm scrolling to see if I see any more hands. I do not. Up. All right, two more hands came up. Lance Pittman, and I didn't start writing down what time we did this. Lance Pittman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I also want to say that I don't support the approval of this FOP contract. I don't think anyone's seen the full contract. And as you know, you've been in closed session for over an hour, and the public doesn't know what has been talked about. I just don't think it's time to approve this when we don't even know what the use of force policy is going to be yet and how that interacts with the FOP contract. It seems like we need to hear from the public, and you know, the use of force contract was revised once in response to the beating of a young Black woman last summer. And the initial revision was so bad that it went back into another revision. And then based on the comments 2 weeks ago at City Council, it seemed like even the revised version of the use of force policy was not going to cut it, at least with the public. And now it seems like you want to approve an FOP contract, which has to do with how officers can be disciplined and how that works. And it doesn't make any sense to me that you would approve a union contract before even knowing what the use of force policy is going to look like. I would like to call back to, a couple of weeks ago, Grace's question, where she asked, would the new use of force policy guidelines have even changed anything about the findings of the arrest from last summer, and the city and police chief were unwilling to answer. They cited that council had told them not to answer, but I don't see why there's any reason why they couldn't, and why it's not in the public interest, frankly, to know. The entire reason that we are revising the use of force policy is in part because of George Floyd, in part because of the arrest last summer, where a young woman was beaten by Urbana Police Department. And if we can't even answer basic questions about whether that arrest could have gone differently or whether the discipline could have gone differently, I don't even know why we're talking about a fraternal order of police contract at this point, frankly. Yeah, thanks. That's all I have.
All right, thank you for your input. The next person is Allison Cesar. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did not. It's Kassar.
Kassar, sorry about that.
I just wanted to chime in to support everything that's been said by members of the public so far today, including the 2 emails that were read aloud. I also agree that the absolute lack of transparency that's accompanied this deliberation over the new FOP contract should suggest that that it should be held as a failure to abide by new transparency promises and guidelines, and that a significant input from the public is needed, including a look at the revised use of force policy before this discussion goes forward. Thank you for your time. I also would like to, agree with other citizens who have spoken about the hour plus spent in closed door deliberation that over an issue that very strongly affects the public. And I'd like to ask that council members perhaps explain the reasoning behind that and the reason to vote for closed session. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. The last person is Chelsea Birchmeyer.
Hi, yeah, my name is Chelsea Birchmeyer. I'm a member of the Graduate Employees Organization, GEO, the labor union for graduate workers on campus. So I just wanted to also add my input. I think it would be good to have more time for public input on the contract before approving the contract, like maybe having a listening session or something like that, and just giving people time to actually learn more about what's in the contract and maybe having a presentation or something like that about it. I know some city council members attended a teach-in last year that was hosted by GEO and Defund UIPD about police unions. So I was really glad to see that in the proposal, some of what was discussed there and in future meetings was brought into the proposal with changing the practice of removing disciplinary notices. But there are also some changes that I think people would like to see that aren't implemented in the contract currently. So there's still the seniority provisions that make it so that senior officers who might be responsible for misconduct are not being impacted by layoffs, regardless of their history of misconduct. I'm not sure since I haven't seen the full contract, but I think might still be 120 hours of paid leave for police union conferences. And also in the last contract, there were more changes that needed to be made for the CPRB to have real power. And I did see some of those changes, but there are still more that I think should be made. And then there's also the issues a couple of people have brought up about the increase in spending on police for things like clothing allowances and also the wage increases that are increasing the funding going to the police when that money could be reallocated in other areas like mental health resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll close public input. Do we have any presentations? There weren't any listed. Diane or Carol, do you have any? No presentations. All right, any staff reports this evening? No? Oh, Diane?
Just one, I wanted to let the public know that there will be a 9/11 memorial ceremony at Westside Park in Champaign beginning at 8:46 a.m. And this will be a joint ceremony between Urbana Fire and Champaign Fire Departments. So that'll begin at 8:46 a.m. Saturday morning.
All right, thank you. All right, the first resolution up on the docket is resolution number 2021-09040R, resolution approving a collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 70 for a term of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023. Elizabeth, are you going to be presenting on this, or is Ben going to start presenting?
Ben will.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for having me tonight. I am happy to report to the Council tonight that we have reached a voluntary contract settlement with the Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council. By way of background, both for Council as well as for members of the public who are understandably very interested in this topic, I just wanted to make sure to explain the legal framework that police negotiations take place in the state of Illinois. We are regulated by the Illinois Public Labor Relations Act. That's a law that was passed by the Illinois legislature in 1984. It was amended to include police and firefighters in 1986. And when the legislature added police and firefighters to the Public Labor Relations Act, for very obvious reasons, they did not want to allow police officers and firefighters to have the right to go on strike. Because that would present a very present and imminent threat to public safety if police officers and firefighters were to go on strike, which used to happen back in the 70s and pre-Labor Act. When our legislature made that amendment to add police and fire, they had a variety of alternatives. They could have, like happens in the federal sector, under both Democratic and Republican administrations alike, there is no impasse resolution mechanism whatsoever. Instead, federal employees have what we call meet and confer rights, where they can sit down and to kind of shorthand it, we say they can ask nicely, and the federal government can say yes or no to those polite requests. That is not the direction that the Illinois State Legislature decided to take. Instead, the Illinois State Legislature decided to impose upon municipalities binding interest arbitration to resolve any contract disputes. Now, I want to briefly touch on this. I'll point out for the public and for the Council as well that there is a presentation available. I believe it's available on the city's website that describes the bargaining process in the public sector in greater detail. It's about an hour-long discussion. But to briefly touch on what binding interest arbitration means for police officers and firefighters is when we reach a bargaining impasse that the parties cannot come to voluntary terms on their contract, we have to submit that impasse to a third-party interest arbitrator. That interest arbitrator is not elected by the people of the city of Urbana. He does not live in your city. In some occasions, he does not even live in our state. And he comes to the city of Urbana and hears arguments from the parties under the Labor Act as to which party's proposal is most reasonable and appropriate, and awards that final offer. In the process of doing that, the arbitrators look to what's called Section 14H of the Labor Act, which dictates the factors that the arbitrator is supposed to consider when rendering his decision. On economic items, wages, for example, health insurance, the arbitrator is obligated to award one party's proposal or the other. He is not allowed to split the baby. On non-economic items, such as rules, regulations, call-off policies, layoff language, the arbitrator on those non-economic items does have the ability to craft his or her own language if the arbitrator so chooses. As a practical matter, very few arbitrators want to craft their own language, even on non-economic items, because they're afraid of getting it wrong. They're afraid of not knowing enough about the intricacies of these particular parties as to what will work and will not work. So even though they have that right, they very rarely exercise that right for that reason. Very important to understand in the context of this police contract, a couple of things about police discipline. And to back up, by way of explanation for the members of the public who don't know me, I'm a management side labor attorney. I work for a law firm called Clark Baird Smith. We solely represent management in collective bargaining and employment matters. That's what we do day in and day out. We've handled probably more interest arbitration cases than any other law firm in the state of Illinois. So we know what the realities are in that process. One of the realities that we deal with is, first of all, Section 8 of the Labor Act. Section 8 of the Labor Act mandates that all disciplinary disputes, and frankly, all contract disputes, have to be resolved using grievance arbitration, which means that when we discipline a police officer, a firefighter, a public works employee that's covered by a union contract, by law, imposed upon the city by the state legislature, the union has the right to take that grievance to binding arbitration to decide whether that employee, be it a police officer, a firefighter, a public works employee, or anything in between, whether that discipline was for just cause. And that just cause analysis entails two parts. First of all, did the employer prove that the employee engaged in misconduct? And second of all, does the punishment fit the crime? I will candidly tell you that I disagree a lot of times with neutral arbitrators on the second prong of that analysis in terms of whether the punishment fits the crime. But that is the mechanism that the state legislature has set up for us. And it's one that we cannot insist on changing unilaterally. It's one that would be a permissive subject to bargaining to change from that grievance arbitration mechanism to resolve both discipline and contract interpretation disputes. So that's just the lay of the land in terms of the reality that we're forced to deal with. I have been an advocate for making changes to that via the state legislature, but until those changes happen, in terms of the bargaining that we do in the city of Urbana, we have to deal within the law that's been created for the city. So again, I encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about that process to please go online and take a look at that video. Having said that, and for further information on the contract that's actually in front of council tonight, as is referenced in the council memo, the wages that are in this contract are a favorable wage settlement for the city of Urbana. The wage increase effective 2020 is 1.5%. The wage increase for 2021 is 2%, and 2022 is 2.5%. Compare that to what we see right now. One of the factors that interest arbitrators are required to consider under the factors in Section 14 of the Act is the cost of living as measured by the CPIU. The most recent report has the 12-month change in the CPIU at 5.4%. So in each and every year of the contract, the wage settlement is less than half of that CPIU measurement. In addition, arbitrators are required to look at what's called external comparability, which is what the wage increases in comparable jurisdictions are. What we see in terms of a standard contract settlement these days is 2.5%. So we're beating that wage settlement in 2 out of the 3 years of the contract. So overall, economically, it's a fair contract settlement that recognizes the financial situation of the city and of the pandemic. I do want to comment briefly on the observation that's been made that this does add ostensibly $450,000 in expenses to the contract. It's important to recognize that that is a cumulative expense over 3 years of the contract. It's not $450,000 once and twice and 3 times. Rather, it builds over time. So if I give you an extra $1 this year, and next year I give you an extra $1 more than I gave you this year, I gave you $1 this year, and $2 next year is $3 more total. So by the 3rd year, that would be $6 more total. So it builds upon itself in terms of that costing analysis. Very important to the questions about the city's overall budget, I want to emphasize this contract does not interfere with the city council's ability to make budgetary decisions in terms of future budgets. What this does is simply say what you are going to pay the police officers who are on your payroll, what their salary is going to be. and say what you will about the need for police reform, which again I understand. Employees still deserve to be paid, and I think that just as an observation, take it or leave it as you will. It is very dangerous to engage in a race to the bottom in terms of your compensation for your police officers. If you pay less, you're not going to attract people to your department who are able to make good, sound decisions. You want people who are able to make good, sound, split-second decisions. And if you are settling for lesser candidates because you're not drawing candidates to your department because you're not paying them enough, that is probably not going to help achieve the city's long-term objectives. In terms of what the city decides in terms of its future budget, there is nothing in this contract that is what we can call a minimum staffing obligation or a minimum manning obligation, which is something that in fire contracts is a mandatory subject of bargaining, but in police we don't have to talk about it. So when you consider your budget, it is still the council's discretion to decide how many sworn police officers you want, what ranks you want those sworn police officers to hold, how many civilians you want to employ in the police department, etc. There's nothing in this contract that ties your hands in terms of making those public policy decisions in the future. This is simply, what are we going to pay the employees that we do currently employ? I want to talk about a couple of the non-wage provisions in the contract and then come back to a couple of the other comments that I heard in public session. In terms of the non-wage provisions, as was observed in public session, I'm very happy to report to council that we were successful in eliminating the provision in the contract that required certain disciplinary events to be expunged from employee personnel files. That expungement provision is now gone, and discipline, once it is issued, remains in employee personnel files in perpetuity. It does not disappear. In terms of relying on old discipline for progressive discipline to build upon it, anything that is a written warning or less, instead of the old contract that said that could only be relied upon for either 6, 12, or 24 months, that can now be relied upon for 5 years. And in terms of any sort of more severe discipline, suspensions or demotions or anything of that like, that's beyond the level of a written reprimand, that can be used in perpetuity for progressive discipline without any caps, subject only to the just cause requirements of the contract, which are, again, built into state law. The contract also has a provision. There's language in there that already addresses the Civilian Police Review Board, the CPRB process. That CPRB language previously said that all complaints against an officer have to be supported by a sworn affidavit. That requirement has been removed from the contract. There was also an admonition in the contract that admonished people that if they submitted a false affidavit or a false complaint, that they could be criminally prosecuted for that. That admonition has also been removed from the contract, so it's no longer there as a deterrent to people coming forward and filing concerns at the CPRB. I want to emphasize that certainly if we had the ability to write the contract without engaging in collective bargaining, then the contract would be far more heavy towards the idea of management rights and management prerogative. But in the realities of collective bargaining, overall, this is a very fair contract and one that I feel strongly is better than we could do in interest arbitration. And it is one that I, as the representative of the city's bargaining team, recommend that the council move forward with ratification. To address a couple of points that were raised in public comment, there was a very fair discussion about use of force policies. I want to emphasize that is something as a management advocate that I would not recommend we bring to the bargaining table as a collectively bargained issue. Rather, that is an issue of management prerogative. It is up to the city of Urbana to decide as a matter of policy when force is appropriate to use and how much force should be used. And that is not something that I want the union to be bargaining with us over. And if you look at the management rights clause in the contract, I believe it's section 3.1, maybe it's 5.1, I can't read my own handwriting. The management rights clause gives the city the right to issue reasonable rules and regulations. And issues like that involving how the city chooses to interact with the public is something that is a management prerogative. So there's nothing about this collective bargaining agreement that forecloses by any means an ongoing discussion as a council and as a community as to how you want to grapple with those very difficult issues. There was a discussion about seniority and how the seniority provisions in the contract essentially trump if the city ever finds itself in a layoff situation. That is, again, an area that is dictated to us by state law. In the city of Urbana, it's found in the Civil Service Commission. In other communities, it's found in what's called the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners Act. That law specifically mandates that for both police and fire, layoffs must be by seniority, by rank. It's something that, again, as a management advocate, I think knowledge, skill, and ability are far more important. I don't think that the ability to survive for another year without having gotten fired should be the measuring stick in terms of whether somebody is laid off or not if you ever face that difficult decision. But that is just the way the law has been created by the state legislature, and it's a requirement that we are obligated to fulfill. So with that, I've tried to touch on the contract and some of the concepts that were brought forward in public comment. Like I said, the bargaining process is an imperfect process. By nature, it involves compromise. And at the end of the day, it's my job to advise the city, what does this voluntary contract settlement look like versus how we would fare if we were in interest arbitration. And I do believe that this outcome is the best one for the city, and I do recommend ratification. Mary Alice, I think you tried to talk, but you were muted.
Thank you. Elizabeth, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think Ben did a very good job of summarizing it.
All right, questions for Ben or Elizabeth right now? All right, with no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
Oh, we have a question maybe?
Oh, sorry, Sharice?
Oh, let Grace go.
Oh,
just your hand.
Go ahead, Grace.
Oh, I was just pointing out your hand. You go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say I would like to move for resolution number 2021-09-040R, a resolution approving a collective bargaining agreement with Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 70, term of July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2023. Be moved to City Council with no recommendation at this time because I think we need more discussion on the subject and maybe more input from the public. So with no recommendation, I'd like to move that it be and for the purpose of discussion right now.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Jaya. So moved by Sharice, seconded by Jaya. Discussion. Chris?
So just to be clear, this motion is to move this resolution for more discussion, correct?
This motion is to move this to City Council with no recommendation.
And where at this future City Council meeting, we're going to discuss it some more, right?
You have an opportunity to discuss it some more. You have an opportunity right now to discuss it. And you have an opportunity to discuss it next week if it moves forward. All right, was there anybody else? James?
Yeah, I want to thank Ben and the team for their work on this and for Ben, for your very clear analysis and response to our questions in the closed session. It's important for terms of a contract that a public body be able to discuss those terms and ask questions about them in a closed session. That is why the Open Meetings Act creates that opportunity for us to do that. it is where we test things. We ask questions, some of which are provided by our constituents, some of which are developed by us. I know I appreciated a discussion about the limitations this might put on transparency for reporting and such. And Ben even went outside of his normal area of expertise to talk to us about traffic stops and the governance of that via different legislation and how that might impact reporting we might want to do to continue grappling with that question. I support moving this on to council, and again, appreciate your work. Thanks.
All right, other discussion. Grace?
Just want to say that with this, it's a tough and frustrating situation to be in, trying to work within the legal allowances of all the state and federal laws, and trying to avoid a worse outcome with interest arbitration. I agree that we need more input from the public and council, and that would have been great. I hope that the plan is that there will be more input in the next contract, which will be in 2 years since it's already 1 year into it. So I do hope and plan to see that happening, and working on other avenues to address community safety and police accountability, like revisiting the CPRB ordinance and role in the city and policing, the community safety evaluation that we plan on doing, more community support, and other creative solutions. I think that voting for this immediate contract is choosing the best of only 2 immediate options that we have, of either agree as is or go to interest arbitration and risk a likely worse outcome for the city's sake. So I think that, choosing this doesn't mean that I don't support alternatives or improving policing. I just don't see that as being an option in this one vote. I appreciate that we did get some positive outcomes, like the disciplinary record being longer, not having legal retaliation for complaints that may turn out to be unfounded. And there are things that I would change, and I would like more public input. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the situation that we're in at this time, and something that I do hope that will be very different in the next round of contract negotiations, to have more input from the get-go. I understand the importance of kind of keeping our hand for the confidentiality of having an advantage with bargaining, and I think that we can get more general input from the public before the negotiations start. And that's all.
Chris?
Yeah, a little frustrated with the process, but I'll try to keep my comments brief. I'm not against the police. We need them for some things. We need to analyze as a community what we're going to do with the police and what we want them to do in the long run. I don't really have any problem with paying them well, providing medical and dental benefits. I have no problem with giving them a pension for the work they do. What the public and I want is transparency and accountability, so that we can quality control integrity, so that there's legitimacy, and people in the community will buy in that when a Urbana police officer comes to your residence, he is not there to hurt you. He is there to help you, and he is going to abide by the law, and he is going to do the very best he can to resolve things peaceably. To do that, we need transparency, and I am very disappointed with this contract and disappointed, years ago for the way the Civilian Police Review Board was written. It was allowed to be controlled by the FOP, and that is why it is so weak and so ineffective at really giving oversight. I think we, in order to trust our police department and make it the best it can be, it needs oversight by the public, so that everything the police do is in the sunshine and in the light of day and in public scrutiny. So that is what I have tried to get into this contract. The process did not allow me until the last very minute to do so. And as you can see that the state legislators decades ago have rigged the game. Who knew about interest arbitration? Who knew about, I mean, who knows until the Matt Rush case a few years ago that there were these floating arbitrators that were going to decide things, that the police chief couldn't fire an officer. So, we got a lot of work to do. The public needs to stay engaged with your state legislator, with us, with, just in general, deciding this as a community. So those are my comments. Thanks.
All right, any other comments? Chris, would you take the chair for a moment?
Yes, I will. I recognize Mary Alice.
So a couple of comments from the public in terms of the FOP contract. I know that Elizabeth Hannon had said that that will be up on the city's website tomorrow, if at all possible. I would also ask that they have the YouTube video posted just right there with the FOP contract. I think it's appropriate that we send this on to City Council with no recommendation to give the public an opportunity to have access to those resources. So, all right, I can take the chair back, Chris.
Okay, I recognize, chair back to Mary Alice.
Thank you, Chris. All right, with Jaya.
I apologize in advance if my internet cuts out again. I just want to, I guess, reinforce the frustration with the process. I know there's a big hope for increased transparency. That is something since the initial conversation about this contract has been advocated for, and I really appreciate Ben spending the time to talk about that piece. The arbitration process is something that I think deserves a lot more attention on a statewide basis. And at a local level, what I can say, at least for myself, is that I will continue to advocate for transparency and information. So hopefully folks heard parts of that process that were discussed tonight. There will be more resources, and please do reach out to us so that we hear from you before next week's vote.
All right, Chandra.
I think that when I heard one of the comments ask about why we took so long in closed session, this is why. The process was very unclear to us as well. And so we had a lot of questions for Ben and staff about how this contract reads. And I think Ben sort of explained it very well, saying that, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. And unfortunately, we don't have anywhere else to go with this contract right now. But we did also have discussion about changes we'd like to see in the future or related around the process of collective bargaining agreements. And so I think that we're all very frustrated with it, and know that we hear you, like I hear you. I understand, I read the emails, I've heard the comments, and we want to live up to what I ran on, specifically reimagining police. I want to see that happen, but we're limited and under the state law, as Ben has said. So I just hope that, and we will be getting things done in other ways and other avenues. It doesn't all have to be within this FOP contract. So I just want to make that clear that, this is not the end, or this is not squashing all of everything else we want and have planned for our police department and reimagining public safety.
All right, with no Diane.
Just to let folks know, the video that we've been referencing is on the city's homepage now. It's called the Municipal Collective bargaining process. And it's a very, very good overview of exactly what legal framework and what overall framework that we have to operate under in collective bargaining. So as a prelude to reading the contract, I suggest anyone who's interested to start with that video because it really does provide a lot of information. We had intended and hoped that it would be available sooner, but it wasn't. So it's up there now. And again, the contract will be posted tomorrow. And I want to thank all who were involved in negotiating the contract, the comments that we received, and also to underline, as several others have mentioned, is we can continue to make changes in public safety and policing and how we approach things outside the context of the words in this contract. That's a framework, but we can do a lot. We can do a lot as well. So, and we will continue to do that. We've started with the 10 shared principles, the revision of the use of force. We're about to roll out the co-responder crisis response team. Doesn't involve extra expenditure of funds. It's a reallocation of current resources, which is what the public has wanted. So a number of things are in the works and will continue to be. But again, thank you all for your efforts in this project.
All right, with that, will the clerk please call the roll? Just as a reminder, this is to move to City Council with no recommendation.
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
No.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
No.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkins.
Yes.
All right, that moves on to City Council with no recommendation. The next item on the agenda is resolution number 2021-09038R, a resolution approving an amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program, otherwise known as CBDG. Family Service of Champaign County Project number 2021 CSSP-01. Is Sheila here to present on this?
Yes, I am. I'm Mary Alice.
Do you want to present on both of them at the same time?
Sure, I can.
Okay, well, let me read the second one real quickly. The second one is resolution number 2021-09039R, resolution approving amendment number 1 to the City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program Agreement with the Champaign County Healthcare Consumers COVID-19 Assistance.
Okay. Family Services is requesting an extension of time. They had a 1-year program that unfortunately was delayed due to staffing shortages at Urbana. So the program didn't launch until February. This was our first grant agreement that allows for a reimbursement for meals served to Urbana residents. So they have to date served 324 meals through June, but only spent $970. So extending the agreement would just allow them this next year to complete the grant agreement, but no additional funds would be allotted. And staff and the CD Commission does recommend that we move this forward to the consent agenda. And the next one, the Champaign County Healthcare Consumers. This was brought to council in March. Champaign County Healthcare Consumers serves a clientele that kind of falls in the cracks with other local programs. And so people who go to the hospital but need to quarantine safely after they're released use this program to help, as well as people who don't fit into the township or other See You at Home, any of those type of programs, then this allowed them to get assistance and to be safe through the pandemic. Unfortunately, the pandemic has gone on longer than we anticipated. And then also with the closing of See You at Home, Champaign County Health Care Consumers has just had a lot more expenses than they anticipated. There is funding available through the COVID funding. This will tie up the end of it. And so we would like to recommend giving them additional funding to finish out this calendar year. This program will be done in December of 21. So does anybody have any questions?
Questions for Sheila? Grace?
Thank you. I think these are two important initiatives. And my question was just a general one. If you could just fill us in a little background on how the Community Development Block Grant Program works. Like, how's the money from HUD? Are we administering money from HUD? And how do people apply for these grants? Just kind of a big picture question.
Sure. The city gets an allocation from HUD each year based on our population size and condition of our housing stock, which is why the census is so important to us to get those numbers right. And so each year, based on that allocation, we complete an annual action plan that outlines the priorities and needs that have been identified by the community, and then how we're going to address those. And so the year that the Consolidated Social Service Funding application for family services came about, that was a joint program that we did with Township, where Township put in funding, Block Grant put in funding, and then the city's general fund put in funding. And there was a core group of people that included Township staff and Urbana staff, and then Mary Alice was the council representative on it, that we did an open application, we had scoring criteria, and then made recommendations to council based on that to fund these agencies. And so, obviously serving our seniors is a high priority, and that's where that one came through. The COVID grant application for Champaign County healthcare consumers, they approached us needing this funding. We had been in touch with, through the past year and a half with the pandemic, we've been in touch with a lot of the social service agencies and trying not to duplicate services, communicating with the county, the townships, that Champaign on who was trying to serve what population, because most of the people that these agencies serve don't just stop at Wright Street. So we're trying to make sure that we don't have that duplication of services, but yet still serve the Urbana residents that need served. And in particular, our homeless population, that's really difficult to identify where they live or where they slept the night before. So Champaign County healthcare consumers just kind of was that unique niche that nobody else was really able to assist their clients. And so they were trying to do it on their own, but given the demands of their agency, they approached us for help. And so we identified it as a need, and that met a need in the COVID-19 funding that we were awarded through HUD, and we brought it to council for approval. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions for Sheila? Even though Sharice?
I'd like to make a motion if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I'd like to move for resolution number 2021-09-038R, resolution approving amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Agreement, Family Service of Champaign County, project number 2021-CSSP-01. I'd like to move that to for approval on a consent agenda to City Council.
I'll second.
All right, moved by Sharice and seconded by Jay. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Miss Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Miss Hersey,
Yes.
Miss Bishop,
Yes.
Miss Colacetti.
Yes.
All right, that motion carries and it goes on the consent agenda next week. Can I have a motion for the second resolution? Sharice?
I'd like to move for resolution number 2021-09-039R, a resolution approving amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program Agreement, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers COVID-19 Assistance. I'd like to move that for approval for City Council next week on a consent agenda.
Second.
All right, moved by Sharice and seconded by Chandra. Is there any discussion? All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
All right, that motion passes. It goes on the consent agenda at the next city council meeting. The next up is ordinance number 2021-08038, an ordinance amending City Code Chapter 2, Administration, Sections 2-42 Appointments, 2-43 Term, 2-70 Appointment, 2-99 Civil Service System, Chapter 5 with Building, Fire, and Flood Safety Codes, Section 5-12 for Appointments, and Chapter 25 Vegetation, Section 25-48 Appointment. It's my understanding that staff would like some direction so that they can craft the appropriate ordinance. And so what I'd like to do is have Elizabeth present the items, and then what we'll do is go one by one and take a straw poll so that staff has the appropriate direction to finalize this. So Elizabeth?
Sure. So I've roughly taken all of the questions and suggestions, requests for information from the last meeting, and I divided them into two categories. So as Councilmember Wu mentioned, the first group is potential amendments to the city code. There's also a second group of items that's just responses to questions and requests for information. So in the first group, one of the suggestions revolved around the issue of requiring whether officers shall be appointed or may be appointed by the mayor. And so there is some proposed language for section 2-42 that would, if you agree, replace the language that is currently in the code amendment. There was also some discussion about whether certain additional positions should be included as appointed. So if you wanted to do that, we would just need direction to include any of those positions in section 2-42. Bios for appointed staff. There is again some suggested language that could be added to section 2-42. And then there's a potential clarification to language regarding city council access to personnel records for the appointed employees. So again, some suggested language that you could direct us to add to section 2-42. Fifth item goes to the term of appointment. So there is some suggested language that we could replace in section 2-43. And then there is some suggested language for section 299-2A that we hope would clarify that term appointing authority that seemed to cause confusion in the previous discussion because it's used in different ways. It's used in relation to appointed positions, but it's also used in relation to civil service positions.
All right. Before we talk about each of these individual ones, I'm going to ask Elizabeth had provided under the second section questions and requests for information. Is there any need for further clarification on those items? I think there's 6 items there. Okay, all right, so what we'll do here is we'll start with the first one. Phyllis, please correct me if I do this wrong, because I've never done a straw poll that goes this long. But the first item that is up for discussion. Can we have, okay, Phyllis, can we have a discussion without a motion? That's my first question.
Well, wait a minute. Actually, crazy thing to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, when you put it out on the floor, whether somebody makes a motion on it or not, the very first person that starts to speak on that issue, the item can then go ahead and be discussed. In other words, that person without a second has already started the motion for this item to go forward for discussion.
Okay, so I need a single motion, but not a second is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Yeah, or if, say for instance, if one of them just decided, start talking about this item, then you can still discuss it without a second or a motion because that person puts it on the floor when they start their discussion.
Okay, I think I understood that. So it sounds to me like we can start with the first one. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they want to add?
The first one being about the shall versus may?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah. So direct staff to replace the proposed language for section 2-42 with the following. So we want to say that the following, do we want to say that the following appointed officers shall be appointed by the mayor and as opposed to may be appointed by the mayor, Elizabeth? That's what I'm.
That is the question on the table. And
right,
that
was the suggestion that was made in the last committee meeting, and this is the language that we crafted to try and respond to that.
I have a feeling that James is going to quiz me on.
I'm just gonna call back to the discussion, which is the replacement of shall versus may. Was that not to make it more in alignment with state statute that it originates from?
I'd have to look at my notes from the last meeting. I believe it is more consistent.
That was my recollection, was that the state statute that defines this. Maybe Michelle has the answer to this.
Yeah, may is in the state statute, so there was the parity of language of may, but I think there was some concern perhaps that would be read as it was in the mayor's discretion whether or not she wanted those positions to have to go through the appointment process. So I think then that was why the question became, well, can we just say shall? And I think the legislator may have made it may in the event that a mayor might not want to fill the position. I don't think they were contemplating that the mayor would fill those positions in a manner other than appointment. But I think that's kind of how that discussion came about. But I believe may is the language of the statute.
And you might notice we also included some language about subject to inclusion in the annual budget, because when we went from may to shall, then we started tossing this around and the question came up, okay, but what if the position's not budgeted? So that's why that's also there.
Grace, I'm sorry, you had your hand up earlier.
That was my question about adding the subject to inclusion in the annual budget. That just means that the appointed positions will be budgeted, correct?
Well, what we're trying to say is if for some reason one of those appointments is not budgeted, the mayor is not compelled to appoint someone to a position that is not budgeted, right? So shall is fairly strong language. So we're trying to qualify that by saying at some point in the future, if we decide for whatever reason we're not going to continue to have one of those positions and we don't include it in the budget, she obviously can't appoint somebody.
Charisse?
I guess when I read shall in any kind of legal way, shall means is an absolute legalese. May is not. And you have to qualify the subject to inclusion in the annual budget. And subject to inclusion can also be a problem because that could be based on that we don't have the revenue, or it could be based on that the mayor doesn't require the services of a particular appointment. I don't remember if I'm not real good with shall myself. That's all. I'd rather see a shall/may with that type of qualification saying subject to budget. Yeah.
Michelle, did you want to say something?
I don't know if that can happen.
I apologize. Yeah, I would recommend against doing a shall and may. And yeah, shall is a very strong word in legalese, and may is what the statute originally is, or what the statute currently reads. And I think that's what we brought forward. I think we were just trying to address any anxieties that might have been raised about whether or not, again, may could be interpreted to mean that the mayor could fill those positions by mechanism other than appointment, which is then how the shall came up. But our concern on our end, as Elizabeth was saying, is then that could be read as compelling the mayor to fill all of those, positions, regardless of the financial state of the city or whether or not there was still a need for that position. So I think may was what we had put forth, but we had offered that as an alternative to address any concerns that it might be interpreted as reading that the mayor could bypass the appointment process for those positions.
Grace, did you have you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I prefer shall, just as they said, to avoid the may, meaning, well, maybe they're not appointed, maybe it's another kind of position. Could we even say that the following appointed positions, or the following positions shall be appointed by the mayor with advice and consent from council? So even more than the appointed officers, but that those positions are appointed positions? Would that help at all?
Elizabeth or Michelle?
So from my perspective, I'm not sure that changes anything for me.
Well, it's just saying that the position, so say city attorney, that position is appointed even if the mayor didn't appoint an officer. I felt like it took the shall out of the officer in particular, that says that the position itself is appointed. And I feel like that kind of avoided that loophole to where if there was a position that was empty, it doesn't change that it's still an appointed position.
I think that potentially has implications related to other sections that are in the code, because throughout those positions that are appointed are referred to as officers.
James?
Yeah, and if I recall, I'm going to agree with Grace. I prefer the shall language, but I think officer was also important for some of the other reasons why. I think this had to do with information about the position, that the council has access to information, personnel information regarding officers, and so there was a method to using that to refer to all of these positions, if I recall correctly. Is that right, Elizabeth?
Yes, that's correct.
Chris, would you take the chair for a moment?
Taking the chair and recognizing Mary Alice Wu.
So I agree with Grace and with James. I think that having shall instead of may is appropriate. I understand that the staff's concerns about forcing the mayor to appoint somebody, even if we don't have that position live. Just as one of the things that happened when I was on city council at the very beginning was we had to go through the code and change some of the terminology for the city administrator because it was referenced incorrectly throughout the whole thing. So I think having the subject to inclusion of the annual budget, which is also something that goes through city council, it gives that appropriate balance to make sure that we're not forcing people into a role that we have no money to pay them for. So I personally like the proposed language. And those are my comments. Chris, I can take the chair back if it's okay with you.
Mary Alice Wu now has the chair.
Thank you. All right. Before I call for a straw vote, are there any other discussion questions for this first one? Require these officers to be appointed shall versus may. I'm just going to say we'll vote on the shall. You guys can vote it up or down. All right. So, yeah, you can either just thumbs up or raise your hand. For all those who want to include shall, raise your hand. All right. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. And all those who do not want to include shall, raise your hand. 1. All right. So the straw poll is 6-1 for that one. The second item is the inclusion of information technology manager and or special advisor for integrated strategy development in appointment lists. So I think that the main question here is, should they be on the list or should they not be on the list? Chris?
I think they should not be on the list.
You think they should not be on the list? Okay. Chandra?
I thought the special advisor position was term limited and essentially wasn't going to be a continued position. Am I mistaken?
Correct. It's a limited term, 3 years total.
What I was going to suggest was remove for integrated strategy and just say any special advisor to the mayor. Now you don't have to, but it would be more generic, because if there was a mayor in the future who wanted to have a different label for their special advisor, that any special advisor would have to go through the appointment process. That was going to be my suggestion. But James.
Yeah, I'll agree with Chris on the information technology manager, and with Chandra on the basis that if the special advisor is about this particular position, I don't think we should include what I'd call a term of project appointment in this model. But I do like the suggestion that special advisors would be appointed in this model in a generic way.
All right, other discussion. Chandra?
So I have another question. So are we going to poll them separately or together, or
I'm
just
gonna
say generally?
I was going to pull them separately.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that there's different thoughts on it. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take a straw poll on, do we include the information technology manager on the list of appointments? Is there any further discussion on that? All right, so with a straw poll, raise your hand if you want the person included. I'm the only one who wants it. All right, 2, 3, 4. All right, raise your hand. This is whether or not you want it on the approval, sorry, the appointed list. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 people who want it on the approval list. How many people do not want it on the approval list? 1, 2, 3. All right, so that's 4, 3. Now let's talk about the special advisor for integrated strategy. I would suggest that we just move for integrated strategy and put a parenthesis S and unparenthesis for any special advisors. That would be my suggestion, but I'm welcome to, if there's any discussion on that.
Okay, could you repeat that?
Sure. My suggestion is to remove for integrated strategy and to just give the option of special advisor to be plural. So that's open paren S and close paren at the end of it, which would cover what I would hope would be any future special advisors.
Okay, so you just want to say any special advisors have to be appointed, period.
Yes, correct.
So just delete the whole integrated strategy, whatever.
That is what I'm suggesting. Yes.
Okay, and that they have to, and special advisors, we just say special advisors, period, need to be appointed.
Yes. Okay. All right. So unless there's no other, Diane?
Well, I would say if you're going to go that route, it might be better to label that limited term appointees or something like that, because some special advisors may be a permanent position. You never know. So do we need to keep the special advisor as part of that title, I guess is my question, Elizabeth.
Right. Grace?
I was going to ask if we wanted to specify too, if it was special advisors to the mayor or just about anything in particular. Like, I don't know if that's a common thing to have advisors for different roles or for different projects. So just didn't know if we needed to clarify the type of advisory role.
Well, currently that's the only position that exists that has special advisor as part of the title. Of course, I can't, I can't necessarily say what might happen in the future.
Like it might clarify special advisor to the mayor for that limited term kind of language, just because I could see, say we have a special advisor for a certain project or a certain thing, and that might not be what is intended in this when people are reading it decades down the road, if the purpose is for someone who's specifically advising the mayor and council in that way.
So would it be appropriate to say special advisors to the executive branch, executive office?
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Michelle, you have your hand raised, but I never know if it's up or down. I mean, it's up right now. I just don't know if it went down before.
I think that Councilperson Wilkins' point is well taken. That I do think there should be some clarification, because we do hire, you want to make sure that nobody ever confuses a consultant. Then if the city hires a consultant to consult on a special project. So I do think you should kind of clarify, if the special advisory position is linked to the mayor, you might want to then clarify that somehow.
All right. So before we take a straw poll, we have to decide on what we're actually going to take a straw poll on. So right now, the options are the original, which is special advisor for integrated strategy. That's option 1. Option 2 is special advisor plural. And option 3 is limited term advisors. Is that correct, Diane?
That would be another way to go. Yeah.
And option 4 would be special advisors for the executive department. Those are the 4 options. Does anybody want to talk about those options? Grace?
I was just saying, I think possibly combining the last 2 of limited term special advisors to the executive department branch.
James?
I think we're making this very complicated for only one thing happening in the last, I don't know how many years. That's what I feel.
Chandra?
I would say just special advisor plural to the executive branch, because I feel like that would encompass limited time advisors, like longer term advisors. I think just saying just broadly advisors to the executive.
All right, let's go with Chandra's summary. So special advisors, and we'll just do an up or down straw poll. Special advisors for the executive branch. All right, for those who want to include it in that, in the appointment list and with that language, raise your hand. All right, those who do not want to include it with that language, raise your hand. All right, that's 6-1. Elizabeth, do you have that language? All right. The next item is to provide bios for appointed staff. And the phrase is, when bringing forth appointments to the city council, the mayor shall provide a summary of each appointee's qualifications for the office to which they are proposed to be appointed or reappointed. Any discussion on that? James?
Yeah, I don't see that this, maybe this is covered in number 5, but is this the place where we would, I like this language. I'm going to start by saying I like this language, but is this the place where we should say that the the term should be included, or is that covered in 5? The duration.
That's covered in 5.
Okay, never mind. I'm okay with this language.
All right, Chris?
I would like to add that the bios be posted on the city's website for public inspection.
All right, Grace?
I was just going to say along the same lines that is provided to council and the public. I think maybe, I don't know if we have to be as specific as the website, but clear that it is provided to council and the public.
Okay. All right. Chandra, did you have your hand up? No, sorry. So I guess I would say that when we have appointments on the agenda, we have all the accompanying documentation. So my question is, I mean, that has to be part of the packet. So I'm wondering if we need that language, Chris. I'm just asking because it should be part of the packet. If it's not there, we ask for it to be part of the packet and put it up on the website.
Yeah, but Mary, also, are we saying that it's only going to be available to the public for the, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday day, and that's it? I mean, I guess in my mind was thinking, it'd be posted a week before or a couple weeks before.
So you're looking for the timing?
Yeah, I'd like there to be more time for the public to see it. Yeah.
Chandra? Oh, you're muted.
So you can add shall provide and then insert a time frame 2 weeks before, when the appointment process is to be voted on or whatever.
All right, Chris, does that address some of your concerns to enter in 2 weeks? Are there any other discussions on entering accepting the language with the addition of 2 weeks prior? All right, let's do a straw poll on that. For those who are in favor of that suggested language, please raise your hand. All right, I'm not going to ask the other one because that's all 7. So all 7 of us, well, that should make things easier, Elizabeth. I already have it written. Number 4, clarify language regarding city council access to appointee records. So the proposed language is, upon request, the mayor or their designee shall meet individually with members of the city council for confidential review of records related to a proposed appointee's performance and qualifications, subject to any limitations and or restrictions in all applicable laws. That's the proposed language right there. Discussion. Grace.
I think this is an important one that I push for including, although it is, it's already in the code in some more vague way. I think it is important to spell it out here because we did run into some issues with that. I'm thinking more about meeting individually. Michelle and I went back and forth on how to word this. And I don't know if individually is too specific because it could be that maybe, we call for a closed session to review the personnel files if all the council members are interested, or maybe 2 council members at a time, and that's still okay with Open Meetings Act. So I don't think that we need to limit it to meeting individually, but I think we could maybe change the language to say that so upon request, the mayor or their designee shall meet with members of the city council in accordance with Open Meetings Act and other regulations for confidential review of records, and then the rest of that.
Michelle, is there any concern with that change?
No, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
All right, Elizabeth, you look like you want to say something.
I'm just not sure it's necessary to say in accordance with the Open Meetings Act because we would never meet not in accordance with the Open Meetings Act, but we could put it in there.
I think we were trying to get around any kind of concerns about exactly. We spent a lot of time talking about the logistics of how would we go ahead and do this. So I think that may be why that came up as a suggestion.
All right, anything else for discussion? So right now we have this additional paragraph and Grace has asked for us to remove the word individually and then add in accordance with OMA. There's no, oh, Sharice?
So we're just going to remove the word individually.
Upon
It says-
request, the mayor or their designee shall meet with members of city council for confidential review of records related to proposed, et cetera, et cetera. And somewhere OMA goes in there. Grace, where does it go in between those?
Well, actually, I'm looking at it now, and the last part of the sentence does say subject to any limitations and or restrictions in all applicable laws. And I think they're thinking more of the confidentiality laws and restrictions, but I think that OMA or other regulations for record access and stuff would also fall under there.
It's any law. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not the legal expert here, so I'll defer to people's judgment for the exact wording, but I think that it's important to have it clear in the code that council has access to review of the confidential personnel information. And I think individually is too limiting and unnecessary because it could take various forms down the road.
All right, so it sounds to me like the proposal is language minus individually, but no other language changed. Okay, so straw poll.
Question.
Oh, sorry, Sharice.
One more. Because you have that shall in there again. And would that require every city council person to actually have to meet with?
It says upon request. It says upon request.
Okay.
I believe what it does is it requires staff to respond to the request.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm just trying to get my shells in order.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and do a straw vote. For people who want to include this, please raise your hand. Want to include. All right. For those who do not want to include it. So Sharice, I just want to make sure what you voted. Did you want to include it or not include it?
Wanted to.
Okay, so it's 7-0.
Included, but without the individually.
Without the individual,
Yeah.
yes.
Without individually. Yeah.
Without individual. All right, so that's a 7 straw vote. The next one is require the mayor to specify a term of the appointment, and that proposed language is the terms of office and conditions of employment for appointed employees of the city shall be established by the mayor. The term of the appointment shall be specified by the mayor at the time each candidate is put forth for appointment or reappointment. However, no term of appointment for any appointee shall exceed the appointing mayor's elected term. Discussion. Grace.
Thank you. Starting to feel very strongly that I think that that last sentence should be no term of appointment for any appointee shall exceed 2 years or /and, I don't know which is the most appropriate word there, the appointing mayor's elected term unless otherwise specified. I think that's important to have a midterm vote and review. I think it's a lot of power for council to give up and not be involved in the appointment process for the whole rest of a term. I think that that's a good compromise between 1 and 4 years. So I really think that 2 years should be the limit, not exceeding the current mayor's term. There were some thoughts about having a little flexibility about otherwise specified if maybe someone was appointed 2 years and 6 months remaining of a current term. You know, there could be some leeway for exceptions if, the mayor wanted to appoint someone slightly longer or shorter, that would be up to council to decide. But I do think that the default needs to be 2 years. I think that once per term at the beginning of the term is too long and not good to make an informed decision when you have new council or mayor.
James?
Yeah, I think it should be as it's stated here. I think artificially limiting it, I'd rather us invest time in developing the relationship with the mayor. This gives the mayor the power to do the appointment for less than their term. If there's council influence to the mayor that says this is why we think this should be a 1-year appointment or a 2-year appointment, I think there will be many times where it should just be a 4-year appointment, and repeating the mistake of every year to every other year is not where I'd like to be. I think it's really, I don't really see that people understand how much of a detriment this kind of what could be perceived as political influence on jobs for leadership in our city could be. And that's why I'm concerned about it. We need to hire people that will commit to our city, and we need to commit to them. Telling them they're going to be subject to a political review every 2 years, I think is a mistake. I'd rather, again, I'd say, let's invest the time in having a relationship with this council and with the mayor, so that if there's a reason for a shorter term, we come to the mayor and say, you know, this appointment, we'd feel more comfortable with this shorter term. And here's the reason why. And not artificially limit it in the ordinance.
Jaya, did you have your hand up earlier? Or was I not? Okay. I know Chandra.
I don't think it did. I see Chandra's up. I don't mind.
Okay. Chandra.
Well, I don't see appointment process as a political thing. I think it would be a sort of a job performance review every 2 years, which I don't think that that's sort of out of the question, or something not to be expected. It's just a review done by council instead of like an immediate supervisor. So I'm sort of on board with a 2-year appointment, or something no longer than the mayor's term. But if we go to the mayor individually with like, oh, I think that, you know, this position should be, you know, 1.5 years, and this position should be 3 years or whatever, I feel like that will make the process more complicated than just having, you know, appointment is 2 years, or 2 years, or whatever the mayor chooses, no longer than her 4-year term.
All right, Jaya.
I like the 2-year option partially for the reason that Grace stated, of providing some review that is not necessarily on the same cycle as the election. So there is that midterm opportunity. As we all saw this year, for those of us who are new, trying to learn about all of the candidates in a very short period of time is not ideal. And so having that opportunity to review outside of that cycle, I think is worth considering. I also think, you know, considering this is a major change that is being asked of our government, our form of governance, right, in terms of appointments, going from 1 year to, you know, the length of a mayor's term. That's a very big change. And I hear what folks are saying in terms of, you know, the stress that can have on people for, you know, going through that reappointment process. I don't discount that, but I'm also thinking about not just this council and this mayor and building those relationships as best we can, but also thinking about in the long term, dynamics might be different, and it might be important to have that opportunity for review between elections, essentially, or when people are seated.
Charisse?
Well, the way I see it is that the mayor is the executive, and most executive offices have appointees for their term. And that is not to say that there can't be some kind of evaluation process in between, or I think that, you know, should city council, or if there's a majority of city council that seems to have a problem with that appointment, then we can lobby the mayor regarding shortening that person's term. But I think the mayor should be allowed to actually appoint whoever they feel works well in that position for their term. And if a city council, or if several members of the city council seem to have an issue with that person's performance or particular leanings and so on and so forth, we can always lobby the mayor to regarding that person's performance. And of course, it would be something that I would think it would be subject to like a majority vote or something like that, lobbying the mayor to assess or evaluate or possibly terminate that person's position and reappoint somebody else. But to do, I kind of feel like James said, going from 1 year to 2 years doesn't build much rapport or morale in getting possibly some of the best people that would be able to perform certain duties into the cabinet of the mayor, so to speak. And should the council notice any improprieties and so on and so forth, we can always bring that not just to the mayor's attention, but also to the public's attention. And the public can lobby the mayor to terminate a particular term. But I think that the mayor, the position of a mayor, the position of an executive should always, with certain positions, have the right to have a 4-year term. And I'm just going, I'm going based on what I see other executive positions do within government. And they generally get to appoint their cabinet, their advisors, and their so on, whatever they need for the terms that they will be in office as well. So
All right, I
think we really need to think about that before we start talking about making it 1 year appointment or 2 year appointment. Why don't we just start with a 4-year appointment? And should there be any issues, we can always lobby the mayor to whoever that would be. The council, let me put it that way, make it even more generic. The council could always lobby the mayor to not continue with the services of the person that has been appointed. I believe. Am I incorrect in thinking that?
All right, I don't know who was next, James or Grace, but Elizabeth, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next person?
So I'm sure Michelle will jump in if this is incorrect, but the mayor can remove an appointed employee. So correct, if you thought one of the appointed employees was not performing their job, the appropriate thing to do would be to discuss that with the mayor so she could try to address that with the person, and if necessary, she could remove that person.
That's
because because appointees always serve at the pleasure of the mayor, correct? Or the executive.
I mean, those words are not in the law that I can think of, but there's specific process for her to remove somebody when she determines it's not in the city's best interest.
Okay.
The other thing I would note too is that this doesn't remove council's ability to not appoint a person that the mayor brings forward. If the mayor brings forward a term and there's a determination by council that perhaps this appointee she's proposing shouldn't for some reason have the term that the mayor is proposing, there could be a discussion at that time about whether or not, when the appointee is brought forward, this would be the appropriate term for that appointee. So this doesn't mean that the mayor arbitrarily will be bringing forth every appointee for the duration of their term. And that can be, in individual appointee cases, a matter that could be discussed at that time.
All right, we'll go with James first.
Actually, Grace was next.
All right, Grace.
Cat's chewing my computer. So I just want to clarify that. So yes, during someone's appointed term, the mayor can remove them, but there is no action that council can take. So don't unplug that, sorry. Cat sabotage. there is no action that the council can take. They can only request that the mayor take an action. So I think this is a huge power for us to give up for any future councils.
You can't give up a power you don't have. We don't have the power either way, if that's what you want to say. We don't have any power. We can always just suggest that that person is not reappointed, or that that person, in this case, what you're suggesting is that person will be reviewed, so to speak. But I don't see a change in making a difference. I don't see a difference in making it from 1 year to 2 years. You let the, I mean, it doesn't take anybody but a week to mess up if they're going to mess up. So,
all right. Okay, let's let Grace finish hers.
I know. I was just trying to clarify what I was saying.
So what I think the difference is there is that under the current system, as it has been for a long time, the council gets input every year to reevaluate and vote on those appointments. And changing it to up to the mayor's term, up to 4 years, I think is a big power for the council to give away, because it's essentially one vote, one input for an entire term, and then not revisited unless otherwise specified. I understand the argument saying that, council could just specify and request that the mayor only appoint for 2 years or 3 years or however long. But I don't think that works, because if you have an issue with someone, you wouldn't know that in the beginning. So if I'm thinking hypothetically, say there was this new appointed mayor who turned out to be, this tyrannous leader, and they appointed all of their friends and cronies to all of these top positions, and there was a new council, or maybe even existing council, but a new mayor and all new appointees. If there was no legal actions, there was no illegal actions committed, that they weren't fired by legal reasons alone that are very, extreme. If it was just running the city to the ground or upsetting the public, repeatedly, that there could be all sorts of issues where the council wouldn't have any say. And in this situation, this mayor wouldn't care if the council comes and asks for them to have someone reevaluated or appoint someone else. They have no obligation to do that. So I just think that it's a really big power to give away. And I think that 2 years is a nice compromise between 1 and up to 4 years. And I think gives each term council member and mayor a chance to validate why they would have people in that position, rethink about it. It just seems like it's a lot when it's coming in, especially at the start of a term for new council members and mayors. I think that that's just a really interesting situation, and to not have any opportunity officially for the council to review or vote again just doesn't seem right to me. I feel very strongly that I think it needs to be limited to 2 years, not exceeding the mayor's term.
James.
I want to thank Michelle for bringing up the point that I had in my head but forgot, which was, if we get an appointment that's a term that we don't think is appropriate as council, we could push back on that or reject it. Chandra, I do hear you. And while I still believe that this should be up to the term of the mayor.
You mean Sharice?
No, I'm talking to Chandra. The thing about reviews, I do think has its point, and I would suggest that to address that concern, that for appointments that are longer than 2 years, we have a formal process of a midterm review for those appointments. That is just a feedback process that the mayor conducts with council.
Why don't we put that language in the thing then?
I don't know if that belongs here or if that's a separate thing we need to establish, but I do understand the idea of getting feedback, and I do think that that has its place, but I don't think we should artificially limit the term of possible appointments to force that. I think we could do that through a different process.
All right, Diane?
Well, speaking as a potentially tyrannous mayor, which I am not, I think the danger of having a tyrannous mayor is far less than the danger of what we're facing now, which is even a biannual appointment process is going to be discouraging for people to even apply for these jobs, and it'll put them through the same stress and anxiety that they're now experiencing every year. You have to, at some point, trust your elected officials. Just as the public trusts you to make the right decisions, you have to be able to trust the mayor in this case, in this city, who's the CEO of the city, to make the appointments for the term of their elected term. What makes Urbana so completely different from just about every other city we can find is the fact that there's this annual appointment process. There's not even a biannual appointment process. Other cities trust their elected official to make these appointments. And that's one thing that makes Urbana is we're not just unique or special, we're just an oddball way of doing things, which discourages people from even applying for jobs. And it has been demoralizing to the staff the past couple of years. It is not the council's job to do performance evaluations in any formal sense of the word. That's just not the city council's job. So we need to, in this case, do our jobs. And the way this language has been revised, it does require the mayor to specify the term of the employment. It isn't going to exceed 4 years. It does give the option of a shorter term, but you have to trust your elected officials to make that decision and then take feedback and presumably have a relationship where there can be an honest discussion. But to say every 2 years is putting staff in the same position they're in now, which is anxiety producing and unfair to people at this level. These are at-will employees at the top of their field. And you have to trust, at some point, you've got to trust the process. And get us in line, more in line with other communities around us. I mean, we are competing for people at this level to convince them to come work for Urbana. And this puts us in a terrific competitive disadvantage, more so now than ever. And I cannot stress to you what challenges this job market is right now. We've gone 3 years without a city engineer. You heard the announcement, we're going to be losing the Director of Community Development Services. We'll be searching for that position. I mean, we are facing severe competitive stresses here. And to do a 2-year term is not any better than a 1-year term, in my opinion. And I am speaking in tyrannous mayor position. I'm speaking as a mayor who is trying to do my job and trying to provide the most positive work environment for the staff that we can.
I just want to throw out a counterpoint to something that Grace had said in terms of if somebody comes in and, you know, the new city council comes in, the new mayor comes in, they do their appointments. We have people, fortunately, Elizabeth Hannon is one, who has been with the city for quite some time. No problems. Lots of people know her work. I don't see any problem with appointing her for 4 years. I'm just using you as an example, Elizabeth, just because you've been here for a while. So my point is that there are career city employees that if there's no concern, why wouldn't we let the mayor appoint them for 4 years? So I've been back and forth on this issue, and I've come to, for me, my decision is that I like the language as it is, but I do recognize that I think we have 3 different things on the table right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the first one we have is the existing language that's in bullet point number 5. The second one would limit it to 2 years. And the third one, and Grace, you might have to help me with this one, because it gave a little bit of wiggle room with the 2 years. So do you have a phrasing for that?
Yes. Kind of at the end, in point, the last sentence, no term of appointment shall, or for any appointee shall exceed 2 years or the appointing mayor's elected term. And then there was some talk about having some wiggle room unless otherwise specified. Again, if it maybe was, a year, 2 years and a month remaining in the term, that could be extended because that would make sense. Or if there were positions that the mayor or council felt strongly does need to be longer or shorter, that there is allowance for that. But I think that the default of 2 years is better than 4 years for me. And on general discussion points too, I see this as accountability, and that we have a responsibility to the public to have input on who are the leaders and policymakers of their city, since these are apparently policy-making decisions on their own department level, and they aren't elected by the public. And if these are policy-making positions, I do think it's important to have public input through council and through that review process. That was a hypothetical of a tyrannous mayor. People can take it as they will if they identify with that, but that was a hypothetical. In the future, looking down the road, if it's another 50 years before this code is changed, I'm trying to think of all the possible scenarios, and that could be a scenario. There could be not as good of a relationship with council and the mayor and the public, and I think it's just a lot to give up and trust in that one leader of the city, because under that thing, if we should just trust the executive leadership, why would we even have council input? Why even have a city council? If we just trust the one leader of the city, why even involve the council and the public at all? So I think that this is an important part about how our government's set up. We are a mayoral aldermanic government, so we're different from the cities around us. I understand that it's still even different, but I think that I think we are special, and we can be special in Urbana. And I know that it's different, but I'm okay with that.
Okay, so Grace, the only thing is I'm still a little confused on the phrasing. Right now it says, however, no term of appointment for any appointee shall exceed 2 years, or the appointing mayor's elected term, or what's the other wiggle room? The third or is what I'm looking for.
Third or that was brought up, which I'm fine without, but it would give more wiggle room, would be or unless otherwise specified.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we have, okay. I understand that. Chris, did you want to say something?
Yeah. The public wants us to do oversight on these department positions.
Oh, please.
And I wonder if there's maybe this is too much stress, Diane. Tell me, but Grace, would a compromise be that city council can recall a department, an appointed position at any time during the mayor's term? Is that too stressful?
Diane?
I cannot begin to tell you what trouble that would cause. No, you don't want to do that. And as far as accountability, there's accountability, and then there's just crippling. You've got to be able to separate the two. You're accountable to the public. You're an elected official. I'm an elected official. There's the accountability. But you're also running. We have an organization with 250 employees. We are running a city here, and for a person needs one boss and not. Well, I won't even go there. We are a mayor or aldermanic form of government. The cities with our form of government have 4-year appointments. They don't have year by year. Cities with city manager forms of government, they don't do, all the people are hired by the manager. But we are an outlier, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy for us as an organization. It's not healthy for the employees. If you really want to improve government, what you should do is put an item on the ballot and pass a referendum to have staggered elections, so that not all elected officials in the city of Urbana are up at the same time. That's the other thing. We're completely an outlier in that regard. It's a whole other topic of conversation. But in that way, you don't have a whole new council coming in at the same time with a new mayor potentially. But as far as trying to provide, you can have accountability. Every single week there's accountability. It's just but to get into the weeds like this as a council, I'm not saying this as articulately as I should, but I just can't tell you how important it is to have a 4-year term.
Okay. All right. I think I have 2 options for everybody. Okay. The first option is as written. The second option is as written, except the last sentence would say, however, no term of appointment for any appointee shall exceed 2 years or exceed the appointing mayor's elected term unless otherwise specified. And Chandra, is that okay? Can I use that, or do you want me to separate out the just 2 years?
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So we're going to do an up or down straw poll on whether or not you want to have the what is proposed language. So that's just right there written on paper. All right. So all the people who want, Sharice, you're either going to have to put your hand up or you're going to have to turn on your video because I've been doing this via video. Okay. So if you want to keep the proposed language in number 5, raise your hand. All right, if you don't want to keep the language in number 5, raise your hand. All right, that is 3-4. If you
by not keeping that, you mean the new language, right?
We're going to go to the new language now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, I'm just doing up or down on both of them, just so it's clear. Okay, so all those people who want the new language, which is 2 years or exceeds unless otherwise specified, would be at the end. All those in favor of having that included in the next one? 1, 2, 3, 4. All those not in favor? All right, so the second piece with the 2 years and the 2 caveats there is what should be included in the next iteration. All right, it is 10:22. We
I do have a question.
Yes.
If we go to that 2-year model, if that's where we're ending up, I would hope that we would think about the fact that we're doing this 1 year in, so that we don't end up doing appointments for 2 years and then have to do appointments for 1 year for the 4th year of our terms. So I don't know if that fits into your, Grace, if that fits into your otherwise specified, but I think that would be a mistake as well.
Grace.
Thanks. I agree. I think that it would make sense to move the people who we just reappointed a few months ago into this new setting so that their appointment would be for 2 years, so that midterm we make another round of appointments for the remaining 2 years of the term.
But we only are in term for 4 years. So what I think James is saying is that the next time that comes around, it would be a 2-year appointment, and then they'd also have to go up for another vote. And I think what he's proposing is that it's 3 years because the unless otherwise specified would cover that. James, is that correct?
That's what I was suggesting, but if what I'm hearing from Grace is that we would just extend all current appointment terms through the end of the 2nd year.
But that would be a 1 year.
No, I'm not talking about a reappointment. I'm talking about an extension where we would just blanket do that, and then in the 2nd year we would have an appointment for another 2 years. Is that what you were thinking, Grace?
I think that would make more sense just to keep on the schedule of appointments, but I'm not sure how it works out legally. My understanding of the plan was that if we had made it to up to 4 years of the mayor's term, that we would have transitioned all the people we already appointed into that system. Is that correct? Or would we otherwise have reevaluated in a year since we just appointed people for 1 year? So my understanding was that we were changing the people who were already appointed to the new code regardless. So if that is the case, I think that would make sense, but I'm not sure what the legal obligation is since we appointed them for 1 year.
All right, before Elizabeth, before we have you answer, can I have an extension for the meeting until 10:45? Can somebody give me a, all right, second? All right, moved by James and seconded by Chandra. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Okay, Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
All right, sorry. Thank you. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
So I was just gonna try and clarify, and again, Michelle will jump in if I get this wrong, but I'm confident that passing this ordinance doesn't extend anybody's term, right? It just makes it possible for people to be reappointed with different conditions attached to that process. So in order for all of the appointees who are currently appointed through June 30, 2022 to have a longer term, they do have to be reappointed because that's how it happens.
I'd say in that case, then, we could reevaluate when the time comes, but I do think that would be one of the instances where it would make sense to have the otherwise specified if it was 3 years remaining of the mayor's term, and that would be something to be, considered at that time. But I do think that would make sense as one of those exceptions, potentially.
Okay. All right. Staff, Chandra, do you want to say something?
I mean, could we just put into the ordinance or something that we are extending the 1-year terms to 2 years for the people we've already just appointed? And just
I would say that might not be the right place to do that because
or wherever.
Yeah, that would be codifying it.
Can we get some legal advice on that?
I would suggest that perhaps another time you take up a question from the mayor on a motion to extend the appointment of these employees. So they would continue to have this term. The mayor could move that you consider an extension of the term or reconsider extending the term. But we don't want to take away, the security of the term through June 30th. So I would propose that maybe you consider doing it that way.
All right. Okay, let's go on to number 6. Maybe this one will be easier. Clarify different uses of the term appointing authority, particularly with respect to civil service versus appointment of staff. So the proposed language is the mayor or their designee as appointing authority for civil service shall notify the commission of the fact, and the commission shall certify to the appointing authority a pool of candidates consisting of the names and addresses of all available candidates on the original entry register for consideration. That is the proposed language to clarify appointing authority. Are there any other suggestions with that phrase? Comments? Okay, well, let's take a straw poll on that. All those who want to include this language, raise your hand. All those who do not want to include the language, raise your hand. All right, that's 7-0. Well, you have some easy ones there, Elizabeth, some harder ones. Okay, with that, Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, did we cover everything that you needed?
I believe you did. And what I'll do is I'll take that, and tomorrow I will create a revised ordinance and get it in the packet on Thursday morning. So.
Okay, Grace?
Thank you so much for the diligent notes and updates to staff and Elizabeth there. I really liked the one that we had the last COW meeting where it has the track changes included. So I didn't know if that would be possible to include on the next one to be able to see what was changed word for word.
I'm going to do my best. I have about 2 hours to do this tomorrow between meetings, so I'll do my best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Unfortunately, the computer will track the changes for you, right? So.
All right, so the next item is council input and communications. Would anybody like to give council input and communications right now? Jaya?
So I just wanted to speak to the frustration around process and also about council priorities and opportunities for council to push forward agenda items that we've identified as priorities. I'd like to bring up again the fact that the City Council has not yet had one public meeting where we've been able to discuss our priorities. I know there are issues that are being brought to us regularly that need to be addressed, including the increase in gun violence. We're hearing from residents about more in-depth conversations about public safety, more broadly speaking. We made that effort to allocate funding for an evaluation, and I've seen nothing happen with that. I'd like an update on what's happening. I'm more than willing to do extra work to make that happen, whether that's helping draft a call for proposals or other opportunities. But I will be perfectly honest, today's meeting is an example of feeling really fettered by the structures that are in place and the way information is provided to us. I think the fact that it was just mentioned in passing that a co-responder model is happening, even the council has not seen any information about this, even though we specified in the budget that we approved this year that no resources, monetary or otherwise, related to this or any other part of the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget shall be applied to alternate response methods, including co-responder models, without a public hearing and consultation with the council. That did not happen. I understand that we're talking about reallocating funds, but those are still resources. The public and the council still should have had a say. And I think it's just a sign of disrespect that we are being asked to represent our wards, but we are not being given information in a timely manner, and we're often not given information, period. So I would like for us to prioritize having these conversations about what the council priorities are, what our ward residents have tasked us to do, so we make sure that we are moving those agenda items that are important to those of us who are on council are actually moving forward as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jaya. Anybody else like to provide council input? I don't see anybody. I would like to say one thing. Oh, sorry, Grace, did you want to say something?
Yes, but you can go ahead first.
Okay, I wanted to address something that we've heard from the public, multiple venues, multiple times in city council meetings, which is the concern about the eviction moratorium ending. And the eviction moratorium ending is going to potentially put a lot of households at risk for homelessness. And it came to my attention at the Regional Planning Commission meeting on, I think it was last Friday, that the county has $8.8 million to help households who have been impacted by COVID, who need to catch up on their rent. There's up to $20,000 per household that they can qualify for to help ensure that they are not homeless. And so I think that the person who runs that at RPC will be coming hopefully in the next couple of weeks to give a presentation on what that looks like, what that process looks like. They have appointments that they take every day. They said that they have slots open every single day to help people fill out the application so that they can qualify for that rental assistance. So I don't know how public that is, but I think that's really great news for our community that there are so much funds. I mean, we've been looking at hundreds of thousands, not millions. This is $8.8 million for our community. So that's what I'd like to share. All right. I think before Diane, I think Grace, you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you. I just want to second some of Jaya's comments about the frustration of the process and for some movement on some other actions that have been already taken or budgeted. I myself am not here to rubber stamp things. I'm very much aware that my role is to serve and represent the people of my ward and the people of Urbana, and that according to our power structure, the people of Urbana are at the top of the power structure and who is ultimately supposedly has the power. So I understand the importance of a government running smoothly and efficiently, and also understand that the ultimate service and the ultimate power ideally lies with the people of Urbana, and that that's an important thing to keep in mind. So I would appreciate as much input from directly from the public and indirectly from the public by council in decisions as early and as often as possible, because it is really frustrating when we're just stuck with an immediate decision that we don't have time or room for input on it. So I just wanted to second those kinds of thoughts. Thanks.
All right, Diane, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on your comments, Mary Alice. The presentation by RPC will be on October 27th to provide an overview of the housing assistance available through the Regional Planning Commission.
Okay, great. All right, any other comments? All right, without further agenda items, I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.